One of the decisions you're going to have to make with a gas engine is whether you're going to use a servo-operated or a manual-operated choke. So far, my giant scale P51 is the only one that uses a servo. Everything else I fly has a manually operated choke. I bought this Z-bend pliers a long time ago because it works great at making a compact, easy way of connecting a rod to the choke arm. With these pliers, making the Z-bend is way easier than it is to keep it in focus on the camera. But that's literally all it takes, and you have a perfect Z-bend. The Z-bend does have a little play, but that doesn't mean anything in the choke arm. If you try using a Z-bend and a throttle, that's just way too much play. One of the reasons I always use the soft steel rods for making my choke rods is that they're easy to form. From here I make little bends to make sure that the choke rod stays clear of everything and that it gets to the front of the motor where I need it. And while making those bends, we have to remember that we need to support this choke rod at some point, so we have to factor that in as well. This is a DA35, and the choke rod seems to run best along this standoff. I need to capture the choke rod so it stays in that position, and there's nothing works better for this than plastic tie wraps. And it seems like we always use 2 tie wraps. In this case, the top tie wrap locates the choke rod. The bottom tie wrap limits how far that upper tie wrap can go, so the choke rod always stays in the same place. Sometimes it's better to run the choke rod suspended between the standoffs. And here again, we use 2 tie wraps. The first tie wrap is installed to the upper standoff and loosely, just so it captures the choke rod. It's important that you don't tighten either of these tie wraps until you have them both installed. The bottom tie wrap goes around the lower standoff, around the choke rod, and through the loop of the upper tie wrap. To start with, I'll tighten up the upper tie wrap a little bit until it brings the rod up. Then I'll close up the bottom loop a little bit. I want the choke rod to be running level, and we close up the tie wraps until it's in that position. We don't need a lot of tension on these tie wraps. All they're doing is positioning this choke rod. All of my horizontal choke rods have been suspended like this for years. I've never had a failure. Next, we have to set the overall length of the choke rod to make sure that it's not beaten on the back of the prop. Here again, we don't have to be fancy. I just make this bend so it's all behind the prop. Then I can cut off the excess, leaving a long enough tail to close this up into a sort of a loop. All you need is something to get a hold of this choke rod that isn't going to slip out of your fingers real easily. I know somebody's going to machine a cool little aluminum ball or something to go on here, but I just use my needle nose and make a little loop, and that's all we need. I've tried further bending these loops that are up, down, or to either side, but all that's important is that they miss the back of the prop and we can get a hold of it with our fingers, so I just leave them like this. This is a very simple, cheap, and reliable way of making a choke rod. It just doesn't pay to overthink this. You're also going to find out there's only so many ways we can run this choke rod that makes any sense. On most single-cylinder engines, it seems like the choke rod is most easily done just coming straight out the front. On this one, I had to reach around behind the spinner a little bit, so I bent the loop down, and that helped in this installation. And remember, at its full extension, this choke rod has to miss the back of the prop or it's going to get really ugly. This is my twin-cylinder DLE-40. You'll find that many of the multi-cylinder engines have the carburetor hanging straight down underneath them. That means the simplest choke rod just goes straight up and down. When the choke rod isn't suspended at any point along the way, I'll use a ball link or something where it attaches to the choke arm. And that's all I've got on manual choke rods. You're going to have to remember for yourself if your choke is on when you push it in or when you pull it out. I've seen people make a little note with a magic marker on the cowl next to the choke rod about which way the choke is on and which way is off. What I don't understand is why after saying which way is on, they have to tell themselves in the note about which way is off.